You ever see a man carry something you can't touch, not in his hands, but behind his eyes? That was Walter Harris. He had the kind of silence that filled a room, a silence that didn't ask for respect, it demanded it. He never raised his voice, never told long stories, never looked for sympathy, but when he walked into a space, it was like history followed him. This is Injustice Browen, and I'm Mark Joie. If you're new here, welcome. Make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what truth in your family has never been spoken. Because some stories don't get passed down, they get buried. And Walter's? It was buried deep. Back in 1963, Walter was just 17, a skinny black boy with one pair of shoes and no illusions about the world he lived in. His mama cried the day he left school. His daddy didn't say much, just handed him a mop and told him to keep his head low. Courthouse is hiring. Just don't talk too much. That's how Walter Harris ended up pushing a mop through marble halls that weren't built for him. Judges with long robes, white men in suits, their voices bounce off those walls like sermons. And behind them, iron gates, cold steel that opened for some and slammed shut for others. Walter cleaned their messes, blood on the floor after a fist fight and holding, muddy boot prints from deputies who laughed too loud, coffee spills outside jury rooms. He heard everything and said nothing, because silence was safer than truth. He never told anyone what he saw that spring afternoon. The way that white girl ran down the hallway, crying. The way the sheriff's boots thundered past him. The way the janitor his closet was forced open like they were hunting something inside. They grabbed Reggie. Reggie was the other janitor, older, quieter, built like a mountain, but moved like he didn't want to disturb the air. Reggie taught Walter how to polish the brass handles on the courtroom doors. Told him to count every mop stroke, keep rhythm. Said it kept the fear away. Reggie never came back. No trial, no article, no goodbye, just gone. Walter wanted to ask. He wanted to scream, but all he could do was scrub the floor outside room 106, where the girl had been seen last. There was a scuff mark that never came out, no matter how hard he tried. Years later, he still dreamed about it. The sound of keys, the weight of footsteps, the smell of bleach trying to cover something darker. He got married, had kids, went to church, paid taxes, laughed when it was appropriate, never said a word, not about Reggie. Not about the file that disappeared. Not about the look that judge gave him that day, like he was just a shadow on the wall. His wife used to ask why he tensed up whenever they passed the courthouse, just tired, he'd say. His son once asked why he never went back to visit old friends. I don't know nobody anything from that time, Walter said, and that was that. But the silence didn't stay with him. It bled into his son, into his granddaughter, until one day, the truth found its way back, not through memory, but through something more dangerous, a paper trail, one that started in a mop bucket and ended in a courtroom seat meant for someone like him, someone who'd never had a seat before. And once that door opened, there was no mopping it shut. Malcolm Harris wasn't the kind of boy that got in trouble, not the kind of boy that raised his voice or hung around corners. He was the kid who stayed after class to help stack chairs, the one who knew all the answers but never made a show of it. Smart, quick, too polite for his own good, his teachers used to say. He was 17 that summer, just a year older than Walter had been back when he first picked up that mop. But Malcolm wasn't pushing no bucket. He was pushing for college, trying to get his hands on something bigger than the town that raised him. And then one night, that disappeared. It was late, hot. The Georgia air sat thick on his skin. He just left his friend's house, a few blocks over, walked home like he always did. Quiet streets, dim streetlights, backpack slung over one shoulder, no music in his ears. Walter always said that was dangerous. Said a black boy should always hear his surroundings. Didn't matter. The police cars pulled up without warning. Lights off. No sirens. Just headlights and command. They didn't ask who he was. Didn't ask where he was going. Just said he fit the description. Malcolm asked what that meant. You're breathing, ain't you? One of them said. By the time they brought him in, the real suspect had already been arrested in a different part of town. They knew that, but no one apologized. No one uncuffed him. They just held him, kept him overnight, kept looking for something. And they found something, not on him, in the system. Turns out, a small robbery had happened 3 weeks earlier. No cameras, No witnesses. Just a vague statement. Black male, skinny, jeans, white t-shirt. That was it. That was the match. And that was enough. They charged him. His mother screamed. His father said nothing. Walter just stood there outside the jailhouse with his arms crossed, looking at his feet like he was watching history repeat itself one brick at a time. The public defender met them once. 15 minutes, Da said. Look, I'll be honest. The judge don't like wasting time. They'll probably offer a deal. 8 years. First-time offender. You'll be out in 4, maybe 3. Malcolm blinked. I didn't do anything. He said. The lawyer shrugged. Sure. But if you fight it, they'll go after 25. Armed robbery, felony. The DA's got 3 witnesses lined up. All white. All confident. You want to roll the dice. He looked to his father, but Walter wouldn't meet his eyes. There was a chain there. Not metal, not visible, but wrapped around both of them just the same. Malcolm took the deal. 8 years. Just like that. And when they walked him into that courtroom, handcuffed and dressed in county beige, something shifted in him. Not just fear, not just pain, but a deep, boiling rage that no one could see. He looked around and saw a place that didn't know him, didn't want to. Same courthouse his father used to clean, same floor, same doors. He didn't know that because Walter never told him about Reggie, never told him about 1963. Just said, you'll survive. Keep your head down. So Malcolm did. He kept it down for 4 years and some. Changed. Came out a little older, a little quieter, moved different. Didn't laugh as loud, didn't trust as quick, and he sure as hell didn't talk about courtrooms. He found work where he could, tried to stay low, got passed over for jobs by men less qualified, had his probation officer ask if he was still clean, got called sir in a tone that meant the opposite. He raised his daughter with care, taught her to read early, taught her to listen close, taught her how to spot the difference between what people say and what they mean. But he never told her the full story, never said why he flinched when she mentioned law school, never explained why he avoided downtown. Never talked about the gavel, because shame sits heavy, even when it's undeserved, and rage, when buried long enough, turns cold. Turns quiet, turns into something you pass down. Malcolm Harris lived with a record, not just the one in the courthouse files, the one inside him, the one no one could see, the kind that didn't come from crime, but from being told you were disposable. And the worst part, he wasn't the first Harris to carry that weight. He wouldn't be the last. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his daughter was already listening, watching, waiting. And when the time came, she'd do what none of them had ever dared. Speak. Not with fear, not with silence, but with power, the kind no one could take away again. Leah Harris always knew when something was wrong, even as a little girl. She could feel it in the room before anyone spoke, like a cold breeze that slipped under the door. She remembers being 5 years old, sitting in the back seat of her father's old sedan, watching him stare through the windshield in silence. He'd just gotten rejected from a warehouse job he'd been hopeful about. She didn't understand the words on the letter, but she understood his hand when it gripped hers, tight, like the world was slipping and she was the only thing keeping him grounded. He never cried, not then, but his eyes stopped blinking. She never forgot that. She also remembers walking past the courthouse downtown years later and seeing her father pause. Not long, just enough to freeze, like the air was different there. He looked at that, building the way some people look at graves. She asked once, "Did you ever go inside?" He said, "Too many times." That was all. Leah grew up with questions, but she also grew up with purpose. Books became her weapon, language her shield. She learned early how to speak clearly, how to stare people in the eye when they tried to talk over her. She figured out the right tone to use with cops, the right look to give when teachers acted surprised she was top of the class. They didn't expect much from her, not because she wasn't brilliant, but because she was black and loud when she needed to be and didn't apologize for it. She wouldn't let them shrink her, and that scared people. She went to law school on a scholarship, paid every dollar of rent by tutoring kids and taking on night shifts. She didn't party, didn't waste time. Every step she took with something burning in her chest. By the time she was 29, Leah was a public defender, same courthouse, same rooms, same worn-out wooden benches that her father had sat on decades earlier. She didn't know all the details, just that her father had been locked up young. That something about that courtroom haunted him. She'd asked him once, as an adult, what he remembered about the trial. He said, the floor was cold. That was it, so she carried the pieces, the silences, the looks, the weight, and she fought. Not for praise, not for prestige, but because she'd seen the way the system was built. It wasn't broken. It was working exactly how it was designed to. And someone had to fight from the inside. But defending wasn't enough. Every time she watched the judge roll their eyes at a defendant who couldn't afford a suit. Every time a DA smirked at a terrified mother begging for her son. Every time a white attorney called her young lady with a crooked smile. It lit something hotter in her. So she decided to run for judge, not to honor the law, not to quote it, but to fix what it broke, to be the thing it had never given her father or her grandfather a fair chance. People laughed at first, said she was too young, said she didn't have the backing, said she'd never get enough donors, said black women don't win in that county. She smiled. Then she got to work, knocked on doors, held community town halls, spoke in church basements and school cafeterias, not like a politician, like a neighbor, like someone who understood, because she did. Every time she stood behind that podium and said, "My name is Leah Harris," her voice got steadier. And every time she looked up at room 206, the courtroom, where her office sat across the hall, something inside her stirred. She didn't know yet what had happened there all those years ago, didn't know the name, Reggie, didn't know why her grandfather never talked about 1963, but she could feel it. She carried her last name like armor, not a weight, a warning, because that fire in her chest, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from men who had no choice but to stay silent. It came from pain she wasn't supposed to understand, and it came from a promise she made to herself the first time. She lost a case she should have won. This ends with me, and soon it would begin again, but this time, with her hand on the gavel. Room 206 had always felt different. Leah never knew why. She passed it 100 times, briefed clients just down the hall, argued motions in front of judges who barely looked up, but that room always had a kind of weight to it. Not loud, just heavy. She never gave it too much thought. Not until the day she found the folder. It was buried in a cabinet marked for purging. Rating stickers slapped on half the boxes, scheduled to be digitized, then destroyed. Most were routine old parking violations, minor citations, unfiled transcripts. But one manila folder didn't belong. No barcode, no classification number, just a handwritten note across the top. Room 106, 1963. She opened it slowly, like something in her already knew to brace for what was coming. Inside was a single page, a statement, dated May 14, 1963. A white girl, 14 years old, claimed she'd been followed down the hall. Said a colored janitor tried to corner her inside the mop closet. Her testimony was scrawled, shaky, full of crossed-out lines. Below it, the sheriff's reports, both short, one noting they detained a subject, the other confirming the girl was hysterical, but consistent. Then, nothing. No case file, no trial record, no outcome. Just silence. Leah sat there for a long time. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing, and then a name appeared, scrawled in the corner of one note, not part of the official report, but jotted casually by someone who didn't think it mattered. Janitor on duty, W. Harris. Her hands froze, her breath stopped. She flipped through the rest of the folder, desperate for clarity. But that was ITW Harris. Her grandfather. Walter. She raced home, heart pounding, chest tight, folder tucked under her coat like it might vanish if someone saw her with it. She didn't ask permission. She didn't ease into the conversation. She walked straight into her parents' house, looked her father in the eye, and said, "Did Grandpa ever tell you why he really left the courthouse?" Malcolm blinked, confused. She held up the folder. This was in a box marked for destruction. He took it, read one line, then he sat down like the floor had disappeared. And then he told her what Walter never had, about how Walter used to come home in silence, how his hands shook for weeks after the job ended, how he'd wake up screaming some nights, but never remember the dream. He said Walter always told him it was just a job. It ended, that's it. But now Leah knew better. She found the rest days later, a record of a white clerk who resigned the day after the incident. No reason listed, but she found an old obituary. He died in 1987. In it, his daughter spoke. proudly of how her father had once helped save a man's life during tense racial times. That was all it said, but Leah knew Walter had almost been lynched. He'd been hunted like an animal in a building he cleaned, and that white clerk, he must have opened the back door, got him out, disappeared him before the mob arrived, saved his life, and in return, Walter never spoke a word, not to protect himself, but to protect his family. That silence passed down to Malcolm turned into cold anger. That anger turned into fear. That fear turned into a lifetime of keep your head down. And Leah, she was raised in the ashes of all of it. She sat with the folder on her lap, staring at her grandfather's name like it belonged to someone else. She thought about Reggie, the other janitor who never came back, the one who didn't have someone to open the door. She thought about how close her entire bloodline came to ending with a rope, and then she cried, not because she was weak, but because everything made sense now. The blank stares, the clenched jaws, the silence. The courthouse had never been neutral ground. It had been a battlefield, and her family had been caught in the crossfire. But now, she had the gavel, she had the voice, she had the truth, and she wasn't about to bury it again. The votes came in slow. District by district, precinct by precinct. Leah watched them roll across the screen from a folding chair in her aunt's living room, surrounded by cousins holding their breath like it might keep the numbers steady. By midnight, it was official. She'd won. By less than 200 votes, but she'd won, and not just any seat. She was now the youngest judge ever elected in her county, first black woman to sit the bench, first Harris to walk into that building not as a janitor, not as a defendant, but as the one holding the gavel. She didn't cry, not yet. She just exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. The courthouse looked different that morning. Maybe it was the sunlight, maybe it was the keycard in her hand, or maybe it was the people watching her step through the front door, some smiling, some stone-faced. Room 106 was quiet when she entered. Polished floors, wooden bench, American flag tucked behind the judge's chair, same smell of paper and old air. She didn't speak right away, just ran her hand across the edge of the bench, closed her eyes, and then she took her seat. The room filled slowly. Her staff, a few attorneys, reporters in the back, scribbling quietly, her father front row, hands folded, eyes locked on her like he wasn't sure if this was real. He hadn't said much after the election, just one sentence. Your grandfather would have been proud. She knew what that meant. He never said I'm proud. That was too heavy, too sharp, but she heard it anyway. She looked out over the courtroom and began her first remarks. She didn't thank sponsors. She didn't quote laws. She didn't open with promises. She opened with a name, Walter Harris. The room froze. She let the silence sit for a moment, like it deserved to. My grandfather worked in this building in 1963. He never held a title. He didn't get a plaque. He didn't even get his name written into the courthouse records. But this building remembers him. She glanced at her father. His jaw clenched. Walter Harris never got a trial, but he got a daughter who delivers justice. No applause. No cheers. Just stillness, because real justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And in that whisper, something shifted. She picked up the gavel, heavy in her hand, and struck it once, not for ceremony, but for Reggie, for Walter. For Malcolm, for every silence passed down like inheritance. That sound didn't echo like you'd expect. It landed, firm, final. That was her first order of business. When she stood to leave, the courtroom didn't erupt. It listened. Because some stories don't end in flames, they end in truth. And when the truth is finally spoken out loud, even the ghosts can rest. The lines started forming on a Tuesday morning. No press, no fanfare, just people. A black man in a navy suit, holding court papers in one hand and a Bible in the other. A woman with 3 kids, eyes tired but steady. A janitor, in his uniform, keys jingling at his hip, like echoes from another time. They didn't say much. They just stood there, waiting. Not for miracles. Not for vengeance, but for fairness. For the first time, they believed they might get it. Inside, Leah sat at the bench like she had for weeks now, calm, clear-eyed. She called each case with the same steady voice, gave each person the same full attention. No lectures, no raised eyebrows, no rushed decisions. Just justice. Real justice, the kind that listens, the kind that remembers, the kind her grandfather never got to see. There were still bad rulings, still loopholes, still laws that needed breaking and remaking, But something had shifted, and not just in the building, in the people walking through its doors. At the back of the courtroom, a boy sat quietly, maybe 10, maybe younger, wide-eyed, swinging his legs off the bench, too small for his feet to touch the floor. He wasn't there for a trial. He was just watching the way Leah held the room without raising her voice, watching the way people looked at her not with fear, but with trust, watching the gavel in her hand, the robe on her shoulders, the skin on her face. He leaned toward his mother and whispered, "She looks like us," and in that whisper, a story ended, and another one began. Because the courtroom doesn't belong to marble or brass or badges or robes. It belongs to the people sitting in the back row, the ones waiting for the door to open. And now it has.